Hello, this video is going to tackle that tricky little wicket, transactional writing. Now, as you know, transactional writing covers a multitude of sins, a range of writing skills. There's a dash of writing to argue, a hint of writing to advise, and a soupçon of writing to inform and persuade. It can all be a little bit disorientating. Luckily, this video will clarify and amplify your knowledge of tackling these transactional writing tasks in the exam. What we're going to do is we're going to get a question, an exam question. On the back of that, we'll churn out a plan, and then we'll turn that plan into top spec, gold standard A-list paragraphs. If you're doing the exam, which has the transactional writing component, this video is a must-see. So here is our question, pulled from a Edexcel specimen paper. So this is very much the kind of thing that you could find yourself looking down the barrel of come exam day. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this question, and then we're going to go on to identify the key words to get a clear idea of what it is we're being asked to do. Write the text for a speech you will give to your peers, giving essential advice on personal safety. In your speech, you could consider what you think personal safety means, consider what risks there may be for your peer group, suggest things that people can do to keep themselves safe and why these may be useful, as well as any other ideas you might have. Your response will be marked for the accurate and appropriate use of vocabulary, spelling, punctuation and grammar. And you've got 40 marks for this question. As you can see, I've been busy with my paintball gun and I've splattered the key words in this question, which, as I say, is just going to give us a clear idea of what's been asked of us. We're only answering one question. Every year, some prune answers both. I'm pretty sure you're not going to be that prune. You've got 45 minutes, and I'll talk later about how we'll break down that time. And let's go on to the question now. You're writing the text for a speech, which is obviously a different type of piece of writing to writing a letter, say, or an article. We're writing a speech, and it's pitched or aimed at our peers, so fellow students in your case. And what you're writing about is you're giving them essential advice on personal safety. Now, my favourite word in the whole question comes up next. In your speech, you could. In other words, if I look at the bullet points below and decide I don't like them, well, I can just shrug my shoulders and drop them like a hot snot and devise my own structure. Or I could use all 3 bullet points. Alternatively, I could just cherry pick the best ones, the ones that kind of suit me. So let's see what these bullet points are. Consider what you think personal safety means. Consider what risks there may be for your peer group. Suggest things that people can do to keep themselves safe. And of course, my other favourite thing, other ideas you might have. You are not limited to those bullet points. You can fly free and create your own ideas and structures. Finally, of course, to give you a little prod in the ribs, that last sentence, you are marked for the accuracy of your spelling, your punctuation, the broad variety of vocabulary that you used. So just be aware of that too. Maybe even leave 3 to 4 minutes at the end to comb through your work, to winkle out those errors, given that you have a significant amount of marks allocated to accuracy. A wee nugget of good news for you to ponder just before we go on. We've been asked to write to advise here, write to advise. Now, frankly, I find writing to persuade easier. And in many ways, writing to advise is just writing to persuade in disguise, because what you're trying to do when you advise somebody is persuade them to do what you tell them to do. It also yokes in, doesn't it, a bit of writing to inform, because you're giving them information that you're hoping they will abide by and follow. The other strand to transactional writing is writing to argue. And of course, this comes into play in these kind of advise response, because you might think about what people want to do that goes against your advice and then convince them or level a counter-argument to force them towards your point of view. Writing to advise then is basically writing to inform, writing to argue, writing to persuade, all rolled into one. So here's the start of my plan, and because I've got 45 minutes to do this entire task, I'm probably going to give over about 10 to 15 minutes to do my plan. And you see the quality of my response, it does stem from spending a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. Now, for this advise students about personal safety task, I could have looked at Tinternet about online safety from trolls and bullies and weirdos and all that. But I've gone old school. I can give advice on not falling prey to muggers like this gentleman to the right of the picture. Would you have a look at that dollop of subprime humanity there? Ye gods, look at him. Yeah, that evolutionary ladder isn't going to climb itself, is it, Hanson? And do you remember the question asked you to think about the risks that you want your peers to avoid? Well, I'm going to say these muggers, they don't just nick your stuff, they can also be quite violent as well. So I think I've got enough there for my first paragraph, which won't be a novel, it won't be massive, it's just going to kind of outline my intent in the speech. Ta-da! So I've taken that plan and tweaked it and turned it into a silky paragraph or two. Let's have a read. Fellow students, today I take this stand to convince you of just one thing. Stay safe. You'll notice I've started with fellow students because this is a speech. I've not started with anything daft and slangy like yo homies. Examiner is not going to be amused by that. Yes, you're talking and writing for your peers, but you still have to appreciate there's an examiner marking this. I know you know not to be too slangy. That first line, today I take the stand to convince you of just one thing, stay safe. Well, that is a box set of good practice. Let's check it out. You've got one thing, colon. I've used a colon accurately there. A colon just before I explain something. I'm going to tell you one thing, colon, and I explain. It's going to tell you to stay safe. Stay safe is alliteration. I'm getting a little brownie point there. And I've used an exclamation mark as well. So right off the bat, I've got some good things going for me. I won't read the rest of it. I'll just read the red stuff, which is the really jazzy, zingy best practice. As many of you know, our town has fallen victim to a rain of robberies. Why is this line good? Well, we've got the comma after the subordinate clause before we launch into our main clause. That's going to get me a brownie point. I'm using a complex sentence using commas accurately. And I do like rain of robberies. Rain is a high-level word. And, of course, I've got the alliteration going for me as well. Let's go to that next bit of red writing, the best practice, the jazzy, zingy stuff. In my speech, I will offer up some key tips to ensure both you and your possessions stay safe. So this is like my statement of intent. This is just a quick summary of what my speech will entail. The paragraph at the bottom, of course, just outlines the risks. Remember that word from the question? So I've said these scumbags, they nick your phones, but they beat you up as well. Two clever things I've done here. Fact, ... It's a nice way to launch into a fact or even an opinion because you're dressing an opinion up as a fact. So fact pies are great. I'm dressing up an opinion as a fact. That makes it arguably a more persuasive prospect because facts are harder to argue with than opinions. Oh, I'm having my cake and eating it here. I've talked about few qualms, few problems. Qualms is a high-level term for problems, but I appreciate I'm pitching this to my peers. Not everyone's going to have that broad vocabulary. So what I've done is I've used a high-level word, and then next to it I've put its kind of simpler translation. So I'm appealing to the examiner there, but I'm still making sure that this text is accessible to my peers. Here I've started planning my first tip, my first bit of advice I'm going to give my peers, and that tip's going to be that they need to keep to well-lit areas. They need to learn to love the light. I've developed that basic point a little bit. I'm going to tell them to avoid that tempting shortcut through the woods. And that third box, the writing in red, hubbub and all the rest of it, this is me thinking how I'm going to present that information as engagingly, as persuasively as possible. The tip number one and the stuff in black, that's me thinking about what I'm going to say. The stuff in red, how am I going to say it persuasively? I'm going to say that they need to stick to busy areas. I like the alliteration of hubbub of the high street. Very proud of that I am. Enticing, there's a high-level word for a tempting shortcut, and I might throw in some sort of rhetorical question. Is it worth it? Losing your teeth for the sake of a shortcut, something like that. So I've got my plan. Let's turn that into a top spec paragraph now. And that writing of the paragraphs should be that little bit more easy because I've taken the time to think about how I'm going to say it. I've got a few shiny little phrases and words that I can stitch into my sentences. Same deal as before then. I'll only read out the stuff in red, the really zingy best practice. I've started that sentence, you can see, with a connective, however, and I put a comma after that. That just stops me starting every sentence with the and I and he and it. It creates a variety to my sentence structures and maybe a bit of flow too. Examiner likes that. You should keep to well-lit, well-populated areas. So there's my advice. And you can see I've thrown in that hub of the high street thing and semi-professional genius with a capital J that I am. I've turned that into metaphor as well, haven't I? The hubbub of the high street is your guardian. It protects you. That's what I'm trying to say there. Second paragraph, you've noticed that I've started that conversational yes, because this is a speech, so conversational riffs like that are acceptable. Make sure you put the comma after it. If you're using something like yes or you see or well to start a kind of conversational tone, put a comma after it. Enticing, remember that was from my plan. I've woven that in, and there's my rhetorical question, polished to perfection now. But is it worth loosening your phone and perhaps a few teeth over it? Forcing the reader to think about their actions. This next tip we're going to whip through very quickly. The reason being, when I came to write my response, not plan it, write it under time conditions, I found I was running out of time and I had to ditch or jettison something. And this was the tip that I thought I could probably get away with leaving out. So we'll just come through it quickly. That tip was to stay in pairs. The writing in black, I've developed that idea because I'm going to say that these muggers are known to strike students when they're out alone. And although I didn't get to write the paragraph, a few little shiny phrases I was going to stitch into my sentences were things like, double up to double odds of safety, and maybe some alliteration to describe these people as cowardly creeps. And just take a second to appreciate the structure of my plan. The blue stuff, what I'm going to say. The black stuff, developing that idea, what I'm going to say in a bit more detail. And the red stuff, how I'm going to say that persuasively. And every time I plan, I do that. Wash, rinse, repeat. What I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. What I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. This is tip 3, and this did make the final cut, the final version under time conditions. But I've got my work cut out here, because what I'm trying to convince students to do is to go home early. And best of luck selling an early bedtime to the under 30s. To say that tip is going to meet with some resistance is a bit of an understatement. So, in my plan, I'm going to hold my hands up and say that I admit it's an ugly prospect, calling time whilst you're still having fun and whilst there's still a bit of light outside. But I'm going to launch an argument here, a counter-argument, and explain that this is important because the muggers tend to strike after 9 p.m. Check out that stuff in red. Ooh la la, there is some Jedi mind tricks going on. That's some black belt persuasion. Look what I'm doing there. I know. What I'm doing here, and the examiner's going to love this, is you're anticipating your reader's response. That is a really high level skill. I know. Going home early is not big fun. Blah, blah, blah. Paramount is a high level word. It means important. And my counter argument, or my argument, is going to be that yes, curfews are ugly words, but do you know what? The phrase hospital food ain't too pretty either. And Rumpelstiltskin style, I have turned the straws of my plan into the sparkling gold sentences you see before you. Again, I'm just going to lock in on the red, the best practice. Now, I know this next one's going to, you see I'm anticipating my audience's response. Paramount, then a colon, and I give that piece of advice that they need to go home early. And then there's my argument or my counter-argument. Yes, that conversational tone again. Yes, student curfew is an ugly phrase, but so is hospital food. So again, hopefully that will convince them, persuade them that my advice is worth taking. Last tip now. I'm going to say, if you want to save yourself a shoeing, save yourself a kicking, just give them the phone. Forget about pride, give them the phone. And a lot of students are going to find that advice difficult to follow. Let's face it, we've all got that wild-eyed pal who, when, God was giving out fear, they were off getting second helpings of lip and sass. But I think a story about a mate of mine getting bashed whilst resisting the muggers and wound up in hospital, that might convince my audience that discretion is the better part of valour and that they need to ditch their pride, ditch their machismo and just give them what they want. And in my anecdote, I'm going to call this pal Jeff. I've always wanted a pal called Jeff, so I'm living that dream. That's working for me. And I also use some short sentences here. Just give them the phone. I think that could work quite compellingly. I might use the metaphor of a bruised ego and contrast that with the idea of a dented skull as well to really ram home my message that you don't be fighting these idiots. Just give these losers what they want and they'll go away. Once again, we'll just lock in on the red in these finished paragraphs. I'll start with finally. That's a nice connective to usher in the fact that this is my last point. Dead-eyed predators. Oh, I do like that metaphor. The idea they're cold hunters. And you can see I've done that. Just give them the phone. Each phrase or word warranting its own sentence there. I think that's going to have a real dramatic oomph to it. In that third paragraph, give them the phone. I've repeated that. That's a message I want to hammer into my audiences. Then there's that anecdote about my friend Jeff. Jeffy, don't be a hero, and showing what happened when he stood up to him. Got a high-level adjective to round off that last paragraph. Grudgingly, posh word for reluctantly, and he now admits that he shouldn't have done that because instead of a bruised ego, Jeff now has a dented skull, a broken nose. So I like what I've done with the contrast between a bruised ego and a dented skull there. That's going to work for me. And we're nearly done. I'm almost whistling the Great Escape here. We're going to round up, mop up, and get the hell out of Dodge. This is time to conclude. And you know how I write. This is not going to be a novel. It's just going to be a line or two. To conclude then, that's a nice way to start my summary, my rounding up of my arguments. And I've used here, very clever thing this, a cyclic structure. Do you remember that phrase, stay safe, appeared at the start of my response as well? I've kind of created a sense of wholeness, a roundness to my work by repeating that phrase at the start and the end. Kind of creating a sense of a well-wrought urn. The examiner is going to appreciate that, let me tell you. And I've bowed out with a subtle bit of flattery. Nothing too screechingly brown-nosy, but I'm just saying your safety matters, you matter. And thank you is my way of oiling out of the speech. 10 seconds of self-promotion here. With the exam around the corner, this book will give you the edge in the exam. It's a quick read with some quick wins. Go buy it. Woo! Conclusions. You can read this at your leisure. I'm done making with the yakety-yak. This sums up everything I've honked on about. And we're out of here. From plan to paragraph, that was transactional writing handled with the grace and elan of a prima ballerina. Well, that's what my mum says anyway. Then we're going to bow out my daughter's pictures and, as they say in Germany, tschüss.